you're going to feel strikes sooner and better. And also just having that elasticity to it, you have better feel to it. And also if you're fishing smaller flies, you have a little bit of a cushion when you set the hook. You know, obviously you're still setting it hard enough to drive the hook.
Which leads me to my next question, which is probably the most important question of this whole podcast. Do you wear a flat brim hat or do you wear like a dad hat?
Oh, man.
3, 2. And this isn't necessarily uncommon. You just don't hear about it as much. You're throwing streamers with a Euro rod.
Yeah, so it's not a common thing. It's not like if I'm going to go out and streamer fish all day, it's not my number one rig setup. But if I'm out there fishing and I don't know what the heck I'm going to do with my day, all options are on the table. That's really what it is.
Like when we were fishing around the time when you were here or in Atlanta, we were fishing streamers and sinking lines, light flies, doing that whole thing, and dredging every once in a while with something heavy. But you're not doing that with a Euro rod.
No, I'm usually using a pretty well-weighted streamer just because, I mean, you don't have line to load and cast with. It's all based off tension. It's almost like throwing a lure, on a spin rod.
It really is, isn't it?
It's the same idea. Just spin fishing with a fly rod, really.
Yeah, it really kind of is, isn't it? I haven't thought about that, but it really makes sense. So what kind of streamers are you using? Are they like heavy sinking?
Yeah, I mean, I use all sorts of stuff, Dungeons, Peanut Envies, it's kind of the classic stuff, really. I mean, as far as big streamers go, it's hard for me to go wrong with a Peanut Envy. I really like those.
Yeah, it's a great fly.
Fish Dungeons all the time. Smaller flies, favorites, Conehead Zudler. Caught a lot of great fish on those.
Yeah, so something that breaks the surface, the water surface and gets down fairly quick. You got lead on them, or they?
Yeah. I mean, I tie them with tungsten coneheads, lots of lead, all that kind of stuff. I like fishing faster water for the most part, and it just gets down better.
It's almost like throwing a baseball in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it splashes and they know it. They're either running quick to eat it or running quick to get the hell out of there. So either way, you see fish.
So true. So what water type? I guess I should say, what water types do you seek out when you're doing that? Does it matter?
For the streamers?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter too much. I mean, I really like fishing streamers in faster water, especially with the Euro rod. Because, I mean, one thing I don't think you can do well with the standard setup that maybe the Euro rod does give you an advantage is streamer fishing kind of like pocket water, stuff like that where, it's just flies swim weird through it if you fish it on a floating or sinking line. You get all these weird currents, makes your fly goes all sorts of crazy directions. But whereas if you Euronymp it, kind of high stick it, man, you can let it fall wherever you want. You can let it sink and then kind of twitch it exactly where you want through. You're holding your line over the water kind of in a tight lining kind of fashion. It works pretty well. It's fun. You can kind of hit those little spots.
So in a pocket, really, you could really fish that little pocket and keep it in there for a little bit longer, couldn't you?
Exactly. You get a little more residence time in there, a little more time for reaction.
Yeah.
It works.
If you put a steak in front of my face long enough, I'm going to eventually take a bite of it, right?
The temptation is just unreal.
What about your tippets when you're doing that? Is that I guess you use a little bit heavier maybe?
Yeah, my standard's typically 2X. I like 2X. Pretty much never go away from it. 2X fluoro. Usually tie about 5 feet off from my sighter, and that's enough. Works, it's like with a sink line. You don't need a whole long leader per se,
Yeah, right.
Just enough, but 2X is typically my go-to, really, no matter what size streamer I'm fishing. Because, I mean, I fish some heavier stuff sometimes, but it just helps to get down better with that thinner line.
Yeah, faster the better.
Yeah, and, especially with a Euro rod, you're not setting too hard that you're as worried about breaking the line off a hook.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's plenty of give in a Euro rod in there. Oh. Well, hey, welcome into Southeastern Fly, and this episode is about Euronymphing, high-sticking, tight-line nymphing. You can find us at southeasternfly.com. You can find us on Instagram, find us on Facebook. You can find us we've got a Facebook group called Podcast by Southeastern Fly. Today, our guest is a guy that I have known since 2009 when he was 13 years old. He and his dad first stepped on my boat. I guess it was August of 2009.
Yep.
And from there, from 2009 to 2013, he had quite a ride there. So I guess you had first really kind of started fishing 2008, 2009, and your dad booked a trip on Southeastern Fly on the boat. And I remember we went to the Elk, had a great day in the morning, a little slow in the afternoon, but the morning was freaking on fire. It was awesome. lots of fish, some nice fish thrown in there as well. From there, you started really fishing, from what I could tell, pretty much every day. So we fished on a Friday or Saturday. Your dad called on Monday and said, hey, can you help me set up a boat just like yours?
Yep. He bought a drift boat not soon after, man. I think we had it by mid-September 2009.
So just a little bit, month and a half, something like that. The only thing different was it was a little
lower profile.
Yeah, it was low profile. That's what it was. Yeah, yep. But pretty much everything else was the same. It was a hide and all that. So as you started fishing, you started getting into competition angling, and that I think is where I said, all right, if I want to know anything about high sticking, tight line nymphing, Euronymphing, that sort of thing, then I need to be asking Garrett. So he's from the ATL, living now and fishing in Colorado. Let's welcome to the podcast Garrett Gresham. Garrett, thanks for stopping by Southeastern Fly.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad you invited me on.
We talked a little bit about you throwing streamer on Euro rods, and that's not entirely uncommon, but it's a little bit different.
It's different.
I'm sure somebody's out there saying, well, I do that all the time,
yeah.
Which is fine. If it's productive and you enjoy it, or if you just enjoy it and it's not productive, I don't know that really matters. If you enjoy it, that's the big thing. If it's productive for you, all the better.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your rod setup.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about that. I want to talk about, and what I mean by rod setup is I want to talk rod, reel, sider, leader, tippets, terminal tackle, that sort of thing.
Sure, yeah.
Let's stop at the fly, and we'll talk about flies later. Yeah, flies will come later. What lengths and weights and that sort of thing, what types of rods do you have?
As far as Euro rods go, all of mine are anywhere between 10 and 11 foot. I've got a 10 foot, I've got two 10-6s, and I've got an 11 foot. And really, I use them relatively interchangeably. Sometimes the longer rods work better on bigger water. Sometimes it's just the flavor of the day and I'm just picking up what I want to fish, if it's something I haven't fished in a while. But I always like kind of oversizing my reels. I think the most important part of it is having a reel that balances really well in your hand. So wherever you find your hand sitting on your grip, you just want that weight to be really, really finely balanced, because when you're Euronymphing, you're holding your arm up a lot more than you would normally fly fishing, indicator fishing, things of that nature. So over the course of a day, that little bit of extra effort you're putting forth, just it'll help you go a bit longer, just because your arm won't get as tired, you won't blow it out early. As far as leaders go, I really like to keep it pretty simple. I don't like a whole lot of knots in my leaders, and I like thinner leaders because I think you get a little bit better sensitivity with it. My typical leader runs, I'll run about 10 foot of 15 pound maxima. Then I'll do about 15 foot of 10 pound maxima. Do that to about 3 foot of a 2X cider. I really like the Umpqua cider material. It's good stuff. Go to my tippet, and there we are. My tippet off my cider is usually about 5 feet. And I'll typically fish 2 flies. I don't get into fishing 3 flies or anything like that. It's just too much opportunity for tangles.
Yes.
Yeah, it can be a real mess. I mean, you fish a dry double dropper, you fishing 3 nymphs, you're asking for trouble sometimes. But some people like it and it works for them, so that's cool. As far as tags go and fly spacing, I keep it probably between 20 to 30 inches, depending on the water I'm fishing. If you've got your flies further apart, you got more tippet between them, kind of acts as a parachute. Can help you keep your flies shallower if you're fishing that kind of water. But if you really need to get down, having your flies closer, less resistance getting down. So kind of the first things I'm thinking about there.
We're gonna back up
Sure.
to, you have different lengths of rods, and you said that you might fish a longer rod in bigger water, but you might not. So I get that. But let's talk about the reels, because I've got a different philosophy on reels. And this kind of goes into our ergonomic discussion that we're going to get in later, but I'm all about light. I understand the balance that you're talking about and all that, but holding my arm up, and you can't see it out there, but holding your arm up all day long, whereas if you're nymphing, you can, with the indicator or even a dry, a lot of times you can just drop the rod and kind of get comfortable, kind of like a quarterback might be comfortable under a center. And streamers, same thing, everybody, for the most part, strip streamers, with the rod tip down toward or in the water. So I go with that theory of maybe a little lighter is better because I can last longer, I can, at the end of the day. So I was going to say I don't fish all day, but that's
I know
probably,
you do.
That's probably a lie. But as if I'm going to fish all day, holding my arm up all day long, that's where I'm thinking maybe lighter is better for me. Not that there's a hard and fast rule here, because I don't believe there is. But what you're saying is you're looking for balance.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, and it depends on how you hold the rod, I guess, and everyone's going to find the way that works best for them. So when I'm holding a rod, if I have a rod that's not well balanced, I'll really start to get some stress in my forearm. I think either way, you're holding the rod up all day, you're going to get some strain in your shoulder. And I can see where you're saying, lighter might be a little better for that. But I think me personally, I'll start feeling some strain in my forearm a lot quicker than I will on my shoulder. And that's mainly due to if I have a front heavy rod with the way I just kind of hold it and position it.
So that goes kind of back to what I was talking about rods just the other day, actually, with Tate Cunningham Moonshine. And he was talking about swing weight and all that weight out there on the tip of the rod. He likened it to a potato, and it's a whole different discussion. But I can understand that, that heavy weight out there and just constantly that bobbing up and down. I think part of my lightness is I've got a little bit of tear from rowing in my rotator cuff.
Sure.
I guess I'm probably more sensitive to that than maybe somebody that doesn't.
And another part of it too is where I think it's a little beneficial to have the rod a little back heavy, weight further towards the reel, is when you're casting. You're casting a longer rod. The rod's center of mass is further out, so it takes a little bit more force moving it back and forth. So I think that's another part where if you keep your weight a little more towards you, just the ease of casting is a bit easier as well.
Right. Whatever you're comfortable with is what really matters.
Exactly. And it's going to be different for everyone, Yeah. It really is.
Staying more comfortable for a longer period of time. Staying on point, being able to focus and not thinking, man, I'm tired, I want to sit down. Toward the end of the day is for the first 2 or 3 hours, you can fish pretty much anything you want, but as time goes on, that's where it really starts making a difference. Like if we're doing a Euro trip or something like that, I'll notice people like right before lunch, their rod tip's not horizontal, or they got their rod tip up in the air like they're fishing, a spinning rod or something, and you
can just tell the energy level's dropping.
So you're talking down, so rod, reel, we've talked about that, but your cider, you're talking about some kind of cider material that's a little better?
Yeah, I really like Umpqua's cider material they have. It comes in kind of multicolors, makes it real easy to see. I also like Amnesia. I think a good 8 to 6 pound Amnesia, pretty great, especially in lower conditions. I've noticed that the Umpqua cider, I don't think I can see it as well in low light conditions, but both of those work pretty well. The biggest thing for me just with my leader is, I don't know how many other people out there do it. I heard this tip a long time ago, but boiling leaders is it's really helpful. So what that does for you take your whole leader. I'm talking, I described about a 25-foot setup. Take the whole thing, you put it in a pot of boiling water for about 8-10 minutes. It's going to kind of become a tangled mess in there. You can wind it around, whatever stuff. And no matter what you do, it's going to become a bit of a rat's nest by the time you pull it out. But once you do, you kind of pull it through your hand real tight, kind of straighten that line back out. What you're going to realize is your leader now has a bit of elasticity to it. There's some stretch to it. And what that does is first, it's going to keep your line straighter for longer as you keep it on the reel, because a big part of Euronymphing is having good contact with your flies. You keep that line straight, you have less slack, you're going to feel strikes sooner and better. And also just having that elasticity to it, you have better feel to it. And also if you're fishing smaller flies, you have a little bit of a cushion when you set the hook. Obviously you're still setting it hard enough to drive the hook, but if you're fishing some light flies where it's real easy to pull something out of a fish's mouth, it kind of acts as a shock absorber, and it's a pretty useful tactic.
So that's a little different than these folks that are wrapping their leader around a dowel and boiling it so that they can make that indicator.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they call a curly cue. It's kind of the same idea. You take your cider material, you wrap it all around like a pencil or something like that. You throw it in boiling water for like 10 minutes, like I said, and you throw it in the freezer for a while, overnight, whatever. I don't know what the exact time is. You cool it down. And what that's going to cause is going to cause that line to just look just like a spring. And, that can be a good cider material for people. It makes the take a lot more visual. But the other part to that too is if you're fishing in some case where you either don't want to or can't use an indicator, you can actually throw some like dry fly lubricant grease on it. And you can almost fish it like an indicator and it'll float for you. So you can kind of suspend a couple small nymphs. So kind of a little bit of a workaround to an indicator almost. But I typically prefer the straight cider just because I think you have better feel with it. It's easier to cast, doesn't catch wind as much when you're drifting it. I personally think it's a better option. And I don't see nearly as many people using the curly cue.
When you were in competition in 2013, you went to the National Fly Fishing Championship in Basalt and finished second, I think. Did you finish second? Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that something where you would use something like that curly cue, or would they not let you?
No, you could. You absolutely could. That would have been kind of a workaround to not being able to use an indicator. But honestly, what most people who are in those competitions where indicators weren't allowed, what they would use is just a dry dropper system. A lot of times that works better, especially if you're fishing skinnier, smaller water. It's more stealthy. Obviously, you can catch fish on the dry, but That would typically be the workaround. For bigger, deeper water, if it was long cast, you might see someone do that, but it wasn't that common of a tactic.
I'd heard about that several years ago. I've never tried that. Trying not to get into that such technical stuff, but I mean, I can see where it would be useful in some instances, and I can see where it'd just be a complete pain too. But I like your idea of boiling a liter to get it the way you want it, whatever that looks like.
Pretty cool. I mean, I swear it feels different when you're casting it. It really does. You can feel it.
Okay. Unfortunately, I might have to try it now.
It's an excuse to go fish.
Yeah, that's what I need. Another excuse to get on the river. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about ergonomics. What are some of the things that you do to keep yourself comfortable? Well, let me back up. I guess I should say one of the main things that I see has nothing to do with rods, reels, terminal tackle, flies, anything. One of the things that I see that people need to do more is drink more water.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I guess out there it really matters. In Atlanta, it matters for a different reason.
Yeah, you're sweating profusely.
Right. Yes. And then you get out there to Colorado or wherever, and then you have altitude. It's a totally different problem, but it results in the same, that you're dehydrated.
Totally right.
So that would be my thing, to keep people comfortable, keep some water in them,
That and eating too. I mean, how many times do you get to a river, you're excited, you've had a great morning, you're fishing, you just decide to fish through lunch. All of a sudden, come 2-3 o'clock, your blood sugar levels are dropping, you're feeling groggy, and you're kind of done. You end up wimping out before you hit the evening hatch. Same deal.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's the same thing, isn't it? Yeah.
So I think bringing snacks, taking care of yourself is important. Trying to stay in decent shape if you can.
Nobody would believe that you have to be in decent shape to fly fish. And you don't for an hour.
But if you're going to be out all day, I mean, it's funny. What I think back is to being a kid in church, I grew up Catholic, and they'd sing the songs. Everyone would stand up. You'd stand there 4 or 5 minutes and be like, "Man, I'm kind of tired. I'm ready to sit back down." Right? So think about it. You're out fly fishing. You're on your feet all day. I mean, all day.
Yeah.
You're wading across slippery rocks, bouncing. In my case, falling quite a bit. It's a whole thing. Walking miles. It takes a toll on your body. It really does, more than the average person would think.
I went out there the first time I went out there with a friend of mine, David Knapp. I don't know if you probably know David. He guides up in the Smokies now. He guides on the Caney and the Clinch. But he took me out there, and one of the places, so we stayed over in Almont and fished the Taylor, fished the East River and whatever the one that makes. What is that? The Gunnison. We fished the Gunnison as well. And when we came back, he was living north of Denver, and I can't remember the name of the town, but we came back and we stopped somewhere around South Park and fished the Platte, North Platte, South Platte, whatever that was. And I just remember walking to the river and being tired. It'd been a long week, and with altitude, and just thinking that, man, are we ever going to, it wasn't that far, but I was thinking, are we ever going to get to this? I mean, I've seen it for 10 minutes here. I'm still walking. Are we ever going to get there? Then when we got there, we were ready to fish and all that, but even getting to the river sometimes is kind of a backbreaker, or, then you spend 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours on your feet, like you said, and it's a deal.
And you start getting into backcountry fly fishing too. I mean, man, you can really exert yourself.
Every place you fish is not like I'm going to stop the car and jump out and, walk 20 feet and I'm there. Especially not out there. You can get into some real treks. So what about holding the rod? Are you holding the rod level? Are you kind of like holding the tip down a little bit?
So I think as far as rod angles, it's honestly to me a more important part of presentation than it is the ergonomics. So one thing you really got to watch when you're casting and you're doing your drift is they call it your tippet angle. So obviously you look at the angle your line's making with the water. You have a shallower angle, your flies are staying higher in the water. If you're fishing shallower water, that's how you want to be. When you do that, usually you keep your kind of rod turned off to the side, tip lower. Whereas you need to get your flies down quick. You have your rod tip up high. Your leader's going to have a real sharp angle to the water, less resistance against it. Your flies are going to sink. Really, as far as those go, a lot of that rod angle changes in my wrist. I kind of typically keep about the same arm position. So a lot of that movement throughout my drift is just straight up in my wrist.
Okay, we're going to go back and dissect what you just said, because I got glassy-eyed about halfway through it.
Sorry.
So start over, but stop at each point. You're talking about you're fishing shallower water.
Yeah.
Where's my rod tip?
So if I'm fishing shallower water, my rod tip's lower and probably a little bit further back. So you're casting, you're keeping your rod lower, flies hit the water, you pick up your slack, you get it to where you have just enough tension that you can track your flies, and you keep that rod tip real low. Doing that's going to keep that nice shallow angle with your flies. It's going to keep your flies higher on the water.
So where's my tip in relation to the flies as upstream or downstream?
Tip is going to be downstream. Always keep your rod tip downstream. I can't think of a single situation where having your rod tip upstream is good, unless you're following it around like an eddy or something like that.
Somebody out there has been fishing for a little bit, and they've been trying to figure that piece out, is why I asked that way.
Yeah.
I mean, there are thousands of videos online.
Yeah.
So I encourage somebody to go out there and watch those. Don't watch all 1,000 because it'll probably confuse you, but pick out somebody that you're comfortable with watching, and just watch some of their videos and see how they're doing it. Because there's a lot of on-stream stuff, and there's a lot of off-stream, setting up your rods and all that. So that's shallower water.
Yeah.
Let's talk about as the water starts getting deeper.
So your water starts getting deeper. It's the exact opposite. You're trying to keep that rod tip a little higher. So you're going to cast. And really, I don't typically ever let my rod tip get more than probably, I usually keep it about pretty perpendicular with me. I don't really let it get up or downstream with me. I kind of keep it pretty similarly. When my flies are drifting towards me, I'm usually keeping the rod and if pretty much in the same spot and stripping my line as it comes towards me. Then once my flies get even with me, I will start to kind of make a sweeping motion downstream. But so if I'm fishing deeper water, I'm casting, I'm giving the flies, about a second to kind of start to sink. I'm picking my line up off the water and holding that rod tip high. Hold it about even with me, and kind of like what I said, once your flies get about even with you, then start tracking them back downstream. I truly believe that you get a lot better drift if your first half of it, while your flies are working your way back to you, you control the line tension by pulling the fly line or leader through your hand, and then the back half of it, just following it through.
So a couple of things that I've seen with people that are really good, they're like wrapping that line around their fingers as they're stripping. They're not doing those long strips like you would the streamer.
Right.
They're like wrapping real small movements, but a lot of them, obviously, to make sure that they keep that line at just the right tension.
Exactly.
One of the things that Charity Rudder said back in our Wisdom from the Guides episode for the Smoky Mountains, she made a point, and it was a great point. I thought it was an excellent point. Mm-hmm. She said, high sticking is not dragging your flies. It's not that. It's like a real good presentation and just letting them get in there and really work.
Yep.
I like to say, let the flies get in there and kind of hunt down the fish for you.
Yep.
Keep them in that zone as long as you can. Don't pull them. Don't drag them out.
It's like you're almost trying to put them in a zero gravity environment. That makes sense. You're doing just enough to offset the weight of them sinking. I mean, that's all it is.
And that works in a ton of different types of water.
Yep. So
you've hit that shallower, faster moving water, and then you've hit that deep water. I watched a guy actually at the Elk right off the gravel bar, which I know that Garrett and I know what the Elk is in that type of water, but this is some super, super slow moving water. And I watched him catch, I don't know, he probably caught 6 or 8 fish by the time I got the boat off the trailer.
Yeah.
He's a fairly new angler. He wasn't brand new. He was ripping some lips, as they say. And I was, of course, he caught a couple of decent fish within those fish that he caught when I was pushing the boat off, which got my attention. That was I think the first time that I said, all right, there really is something to this.
Sure.
'Cause I had heard that people that do fish competition, they like this type of fishing because of the numbers. Mm-hmm. So the number of fish really makes a difference. Because talk to us just a second, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. How do they judge that competition? What's the score? How do I score points?
All right, so your score is essentially what they'll do. They'll set up a minimum size fish that counts. So you catch a fish, there's an automatic number of what they call fish points that you get for it. Then for every centimeter over that minimum length, you get additional points towards it. Where you're talking about why it's really favored by competition anglers is the number of points and I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but the number of points you get for just catching a fish typically outweighs the number of points it takes or you get, as you catch bigger fish. If you can catch 2 small fish back to back versus, 1 decent sized fish in the same amount of time, you're better off catching the 2 smaller fish. So you get a standard set of points just for a fish, and then there's kind of additional points per centimeter over the minimum size length. And then throughout your time session, The total sum of those points, you compare them to everyone else fishing the river at the same time as you, and then they score it, first through however many people you got fishing at the same time, and then throughout the whole competition, you add up the number of what they call placing points, and that essentially decides who wins it.
So if it's 1 point per fish, and you can catch 2 fish in 10 minutes versus 1, you've got twice the number of points.
Yep, essentially.
Then you start stacking on centimeters.
Yep.
Which I don't measure fish in centimeters.
I know.
Which leads me to my next question, which is probably the most important question of this whole podcast. Do you wear a flat brim hat, or do you wear like a dad hat?
Oh man, I don't wear flat brim hats, man. I don't look good in a flat brim hat. I don't like them. They're not my style.
I knew there was something good about you. Good and wholesome.
No, I can't do that one.
Somebody out there saying, "Hey, I wear a flat brim hat," and that's a joke.
Hey man,
so
teach their own.
Please don't.
Whatever makes you happy.
Yeah, please don't send an email. Yes, whatever makes you happy, and please don't send an email. Let's talk about getting the right drift, and you touched on that for shallow water and deeper water, and I appreciate you giving good feedback here, because I think people that listen to these, some people are proficient and they just listen to it to pass the time and have fun and pick it apart and that sort of thing. But I think that there's a whole other side of that, of the listener out there, that they're seeking information on certain topics. And they may be listening to this, in 2021, and they may wait and listen to it in 2023 when they get to that stage in their fly fishing pastime or whatever we want to call it, and they'll come back to this. So I appreciate you giving good feedback, because that presentation really doesn't change a ton. Flies will change, rods will definitely change, reels will change, lines will certainly change as we go through the years. But what's probably the number one tip that you could give somebody that, let's talk to the person that is just starting to Euronymph, high stick, tight line nymph, up to that intermediate person. So the person in competition, they may or may not listen to this, and if they do, there's a really good chance, if they've been doing it for a while, they probably already can answer the questions before I can ask.
Sure.
So let's focus back on these folks that are trying to learn more. What's the number one tip to be successful for presentation?
The number one tip is to really, you're sitting there watching your sighter. I think the number one thing for me is to look past your sighter. Try to really, really understand what your flies are doing as they're going through the water. When you're looking at a stream, you have all these different currents going on, all these different depth changes and whatnot. And the best part about Euronymphing that you don't get with indicator fishing, that you don't get with dry dropper fishing, is by raising or lowering your rod tip, you have the opportunity to adapt where your flies are sitting in the column throughout your drift. And that's a huge advantage to you. You have so many contour changes. But I think the number one thing is to, first off, you got to have flies that are getting down to where you can control the depth, but really, really think about what your flies are doing, and what movements they may or may not be making. If you have too much slack in your sighter, your flies are probably sinking. It's not looking natural. If you're pulling too hard, your flies are dragging through the water. It's not looking natural. Kind of like I touched on earlier, you want to make it almost feel like the flies are just in a zero gravity, just barely floating, fluttering their position. But the number one thing is just really, really try to have a good understanding of what your flies are doing when you're presenting them in pretty much any situation you're presenting them.
The dragging piece, I totally get.
Yep.
The sinking piece, that's interesting.
Yep.
You're not talking about that first sink, so I cast it in there and it starts sinking.
Right.
That's sort of like okay.
Yeah, it is okay. So I think the bigger thing here is when you're Euronymphing, you're typically fishing pretty heavy flies. You're using tungsten beads, usually using a couple flies. This fly sink quick. If you're tracking good throughout a drift and all of a sudden your leader goes flat, those flies are going to drop fast. They might drag on the bottom in a weird way. They might get caught. And now there's a whole nother topic about inducing motion in your flies, which can help you, but that's not what I'm getting at here right here. I'm just talking about trying to get your flies to where they're feeling like they're in that zero gravity environment. And they're just staying still. They're just floating along.
Let's talk about inducing motion then.
Absolutely.
Let's hit on that just a minute.
Yeah.
So what can an intermediate to novice angler learn about that? Give me a couple things that somebody might want to hear.
So I think a lot of times when people first learn to fly fish and nymph, they're usually using indicators, right? And you cast upstream, you mend, you do your drift all the way through. One of the first things you're taught is to let your flies swing at the end. That's two purposes, right? Maybe fish comes up and hit it. It's got that motion. It can induce a strike, look like an emerger. The other parts, you're loading your rod. You can do that same thing when you're nymphing. Swinging flies is a great tactic. But one thing you can do while you're nymphing that you can't do with an indicator is jigging flies. And sometimes what I'll find, if I'm fishing a river, and we've all had days where it's tough, the fish just don't seem to be doing a lot. They're not feeding on anything. Sometimes it does just take a little bit of something extra, and just kind of doing some slight motions. And I'm not talking about ripping a jig. You're not fishing for amberjack or anything here.
Right.
I'm just talking about kind of slow twitches. You're bumping your rod up and down maybe 2 to 4 inches, probably every 3 or so seconds, just kind of trying to look like a bug slowly starting to make its way up through the water column. And sometimes that little bit of motion can be a trigger. I mean, think about it when you're streamer fishing, right? One of the biggest parts about streamer fishing, why you see these big gaudy flies, all this flash, you're inducing a reaction with that. Nothing a fish sees in its life looks anything like a bright yellow sex dungeon with a bunch of gold flash off of it. Nothing looks like that. But
right.
What you're doing is you're doing something that's a little bit outside of the norm. And, it's kind of like you roll a tennis ball by a dog. They might look at it and watch it. You move it by a dog, they're going to go chase it. I truly think it's the same thing as that predatory instinct.
Similar to a cat.
Yeah.
I like to think of a cat. Yeah. A cat and a ball of yarn.
Exactly.
You start really moving it up and down.
Gets it excited. It's the exact same thing.
That could go back even to tarpon fishing as far as that goes.
And how often is it that just doing something a little different than everyone else helps you? Not everyone's jigging their flies. Sometimes it's a little bit different look than the fish normally get, and it's just enough to be a game changer, and you might put a few more in the net.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm finding is on like flatter water, I guess I've been doing it for years and really haven't thought much about it, is when you make your mend on a long drift, because some currents come in a little funny. And by long drift, I mean 10, 15 feet out of the boat. You make that mend, and the next thing you know, you're getting a hit. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's just a little bit different tactic.
Yep.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and a lot of times what I like to do is if I'm fishing a run, I'll fish through it, dead drifting my flies, until I'm pretty much not getting anything else. And it's sometimes it's just a last ditch effort to see if you can pull something extra out, and it works more often than you think.
So are you using an indicator any with yours? Because I know that we've talked to several people who have said, yeah, they're using indicators. And I've used an indicator before, but not as often on a Euro setup as what I do. I think I switched back.
Well, yeah, I definitely don't most of the time, but I absolutely do sometimes. The reality is that Euronymphing is not an all-encompassing tactic. You cannot fish every single type of water or every type of condition super effectively. I mean, out here we get tons of wind. You start getting wind moving through and you're trying to Euronymph your fly line's blowing all sorts of crazy ways. You're not getting a good drift. You're not able to tell if you have fish on. Perfect time to use an indicator. Other times, I like to use them, if I'm fishing flatter water, bigger, wider, flatter water, I like to use them mainly because the flies I'm using are pretty heavy. And as you start to cast flies further away from you, especially in slower water, it kind of gives you your flies a pendulum effect. They'll start swinging back towards you. So while they're going downstream, they're also working their way across current. I just don't think it looks right. Then if I'm fishing small flies, I've gotten pretty into doing some small midge fishing out here. Indicators are a great choice. So I think you see a lot of people who get into Euronymphing and they get really excited. It's a great tactic. It works. They're catching more fish than they've been catching ever before. And they almost stick to it too much. It's worth just keeping an open mind and just adapting to whatever the conditions, are like around you.
Obviously, you've done that. If we kick this off by talking about streamers and we're talking about indicators, dry flies, dry droppers, I mean, I think you're hitting on all the same things that any fly angler would hit on. But it seems out of place from what a lot of folks have been fed on Euronymphing.
Yep.
And really, I don't think it is. I mean, obviously, fly fishing is something that you can make of it whatever you want.
Exactly.
Short of throwing a rooster tail on a fly rod, and some people do that.
I'm sure.
And what do? Okay, well, that's kind of your way of doing it.
Yeah.
That's not my way of doing it. But you catch 3 or 4 great big fish in front of me, it'll be my way.
Yeah, right.
So,
success changes opinions pretty quickly.
It does. Exactly. You're exactly right. When do I know if I'm getting the wrong drift? This is kind of a out of left field question, but
so that if you can tell that you can't feel your flies, you don't know where they are, or you're hanging up too much. If you're hanging up on the bottom too much, you're you're letting those flies sink too much. You're not keeping proper tension with it. If you're not catching fish.
Yeah.
Other than that, but yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is a lot of times when you're getting the wrong drift, people can go a little too slow or like have the rod tip a little too far upstream, and it'll cause your flies to sink a lot faster. And they'll be dragging. You get all sorts of slime all over them, and I'm talking both flies, not just your fly on bottom. I don't see it personally as much where people are, pulling them too fast. It's usually the opposite.
I think a lot of times I pull them too slow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess I shouldn't say I pull them too slow. I move too slow. That's probably the better way to put it. I'm not necessarily pulling them or whatever. I'm just like behind them just a tad.
Yeah.
And I can see that in the line.
Yeah.
And, and then I wake up and like, okay, I need to move a little more. Maybe a little quicker.
Yeah.
To keep up with them like you're talking
about.
And
it makes it harder to detect a strike too. I mean, you're not getting as much control. Your flies probably aren't looking as natural. You're not feeling strikes when they do happen as quickly as you need to. I think one of the coolest parts about Euronymphing is how fast you detect strikes. And it really makes me wonder how many strikes I've missed while, just kind of general indicator fishing, because there's times where you have a hit and before you know it, that sucker's gone. And the way they hit, you would have never had a moment for that indicator to even flinch.
That's exactly right.
And that little bit of keeping that proper tension and having that little bit of extra time to react to, it's huge.
There are a lot of folks that'll pick up that indicator just like, especially in water, probably like you're fishing, like the Yampa in town and up toward the dam as well. Water's a little quicker there, so they'll mend or lift up a little, even with the indicator, a little more than what somebody on that flatter water would do. I was fishing, and this was years ago, but we were fishing the elk, and I was fishing out of the back of the boat. A friend of mine was fishing out of the front of the boat, and we were just kind of floating sideways. And he was fishing he was fishing my water. That's what was going on. I'll just be honest, which was to me a no-no, but it was clear water, so I could see. He threw right in front of me.
Yeah.
And I saw a pod of 3 or 4 brook trout out there eating. And this fish was eating. It wasn't moving the indicator, but it was eating. Mm-hmm. And I said, set the hook. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
Because he thought I was trying to get him out of my water, which I really wasn't trying to do. And so I guess probably my voice went up a little louder. And I said, set the hook. And so he did. He missed the fish. And he said, I told you there wasn't nothing on there. I said, throw it back in there.
Yeah.
So he threw it back in there. And one of those brook trout came out and ate again, did not move his indicator. And I said, set the hook. And he did it then and caught the fish. Yeah. Neither of those fish moved that indicator, which was so crazy. But it's exactly what you're talking about, is that so many times we depend and rely on the indicator to tell us what's going on. And the fish,
they don't care.
And sometimes they're coming up from below it and eating up.
Yep.
And it never really moves it. It may wiggle it just a tad.
Yeah.
It may not even be enough for somebody to realize it, but I was able to see that firsthand that day, and that was a big day for me to think that, okay, maybe we're getting a little more action than what we think we are.
Well, how many times have everyone who's fly fished for a while has done this, how many times you go to recast and you got a fish on there?
Yeah, right. Yes.
You feel like a rock star, look like you know what you're doing, but you're sitting there thinking to yourself, man, I am a lucky dude at the moment. I had no idea this was happening. But
so true.
But another thing that's amazed me, and I think a lot of people who've urinated quite a bit have all seen this. It really amazes me how soon into a drift sometimes fish hit. I've had times where, I cast and by the time I've even picked my lineup, there's a fish on. The flies haven't hardly had a second to sink. The fish are just super active. They see something they like, they go grab it. Trout are fast. They have great eyesight.
That goes back to what we were talking about earlier on my Yampa excursion of throwing on a shelf that was, maybe a foot, 2 foot deep, and the nymph, it could not have sank more than a couple of seconds before a fish ate. And they're hitting real early in a lot of cases. In that case, I know it was when the fly was still falling, because there was so much leader out there, so much tippet and leader out there from the indicator that there's no way. So I think you're right. I think they hit a lot quicker in the drift than what we think.
Fish do weird stuff.
It's not one size fits all. That's for sure, as far as the eat goes. So let's talk about the fly, since we're kind of on that subject.
Sure.
I know what's in my fly box. I'm probably more of a traditionalist, and there's some dirty stuff in there too.
Sure.
Some eggs and
a couple squirmies, maybe.
Yeah, stuff like that. Stuff that I'm not proud of.
Maybe a mop or two.
But it works. Yeah, there's some mops in there. There's some white mops, definitely some white mops, which I don't have as much luck on.
I don't either. I don't fish mops a whole lot.
Yeah, I've got a couple of friends that fish them.
Some people love them. Some people catch the crap out of them.
Yeah, and I've watched. I'm like, how do you do that? Because I've got them and I fished them. I can fish theirs and still not be quite as good as what they are on them, probably.
Right.
So I don't know if it's technique or luck, or they're putting it in different water than I am. But they do work. I've seen them work.
Yep.
They don't work as well for David, but that doesn't always mean anything either. So I'm a little bit more traditional as far as nymphs and dries go. What about you? And so your Euro box.
Sure.
I mean, does it look like a box of Christmas tree ornaments?
Look like someone opened a jelly bean bag and spilled it.
Yeah. What's it look like?
No, it doesn't look like that. I mean, really, I keep flies pretty simple. My biggest thing is just organizing things by size. I carry 4 boxes on me. I have a box for, I call it my small nymph and midge box. Then I've got my standard nymph box. I've got my anchor box, and then I've got my junk and small streamer box. Kind of keep it like that. Try to organize things mostly by weight, kind of by fly type a little bit. But I'm honestly not a huge believer in that, the exact fly type you're using makes a huge difference. And obviously,
now hold on. You're out west where all the good hatches are.
That's true. So, I was about to back myself out of that one a little bit. We're talking a case by case basis. If you're fishing a freestone stream where you've got all sorts of bug life, and yes, there are situations where fish are keyed in on a hatch, and you got to be ready for that. You got to have your split cases, all that kind of stuff, match the hatch. I've got that stuff, but 90% of the time, I'm fishing 2 flies that are probably size 16, size 18, usually some sort of pheasant tail variation. The other one, some sort of blueing olive-ish quill nymph variation. There's some waltz worms in there. I mean, look at a waltz worm. You know how many people catch a ton of fish on those, and all it is hairs you're dumping around a hook, sometimes with some flash wrapped around it.
Yeah.
Freaking great fly, but it's simple. And I think a lot of times, especially in freestone streams, I mean, I really don't think you have to have perfect matches. Now, I'm sure there's someone out there watching going or listening saying, man, I can only catch fish on just the most crazy specifically tied nymph for this kind of bug here and there. But in my experience, if you're fishing a good size fly, a size fly that mimics most of the bugs in the water, you've got good weight on it, you've got the right kind of color scheme, you're golden for the most part. I really like, especially starting out the day, like fishing one fly that's a little more drab, one with a little more flash, see what the fish are feeling, and then kind of going from there. And then bead size, fish a lot of, or not bead size, bead color, fish a lot of different bead colors. I do vary things up a little bit there. I really like black for some pressured water, like silver on cloudy days, golden copper on sunny days. Throw some pinks and reds in there. Get fun with it. I've got purple.
Let's talk about that black. Let's back up a minute. Out there, pressured water is, we see a couple people a day, 2-3 people a day. Yeah. Here, pressured water is, I see 20 or 30 people a day. So it's a little different. But you were talking about fishing black beads. Mm-hmm. How'd you get turned on to that?
I just think they're more natural. It's the exact same situation like what you're talking about. When you've got places that are fished more heavily, I think that if you have something that's reflecting a lot less light, it makes the fish a little less weary of it. Because as fish get caught over and over, I'm sure they catch on to the fact that every time they bite something shiny, they get yanked out of the water, can't breathe for a minute,
Get called up to the UFO. Yeah.
Not a great experience. But yeah, I think having something that gives the fish one less thing to reject it works in your favor at times.
Are you on the cloudy day a little less flash, sunny day a little more flash train?
Yeah, I think so. I think I do find my way that way. I do kind of like drabber flies. I think a darker contrast on a darker day works well. Because you got to think, I remember floating down the Toccoa River once, releasing a fish, looking in the water, and there was a great hatch going off, and I could see some bugs in the water emerging, and you see that bubble forming on their back, and it's a sunny day, and it's amazing how much light catches that. On a cloudy day, that's not happening. So if you're fishing something that looks like the sunshine moving through a river on a cloudy day, pressured fish are gonna be sitting there going like, well, that doesn't look right. Now, obviously, there's some light going through, and I think silver gives off kind of the right color of flash a little more if you want something flashy. I think adjusting your flies to light conditions, can be a real difference maker.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know that I do that all that often. I will vary the fly type with maybe a little bit more, a little bit less flash, but kind of keep the same profile. Yeah. Keep the same size, and I just pick through the fly box till I find one that, okay, this is a little better.
Sure.
But I don't necessarily get off of the bead onto a black, like from a silver to a black or anything like that. But I will go from one's a little more flashier than the other.
Yeah.
I will do that.
Yeah. And, you can go as crazy with that as you want. I'm not saying I don't fish a gold bead on a cloudy day here and there. Sometimes I do, and it freaking works.
Yeah, right.
I just think in general, I've kind of found that, and it's almost a confidence within myself that I've realized, hey, if it's cloudy out, silver beads work really well for me a lot of times in the past. Let's keep that momentum rolling,
And your friend might say, I never do that.
Yeah, exactly. They might catch more than me that day.
He may not, or she may not. I mean, you just don't ever know who's going to catch what.
Yep.
It could come down to they're getting a little bit better presentation that particular day than I am or you are.
Yep.
So let's talk about travel just a minute. We'll try to wrap this up here in just a minute. Travel out there, you read, you hear so much about, like I just said, you're out there with all the hatches.
Yep.
Right? You got to be a little bit more precise
Yep.
with what you're throwing. And then you bring up a waltz worm. When I think waltz worm, I think something that goes to the bottom immediately.
Yep.
Because there's nothing out there to stop it.
No drag. The only thing that stops is the fish picking it up on the way down.
Yeah, right. Which we just talked about. Exactly. But I think as we get ready to travel, well, I can go back to my first trip out there. I got a list of flies that I heard worked and read on the internet. And then David told me, hey, you need some of these. But I went further and said, all right, what hatches are on these particular rivers and blah, 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 blah. And then I'll be darned if I didn't end up fishing pretty much a lot of the same things that I fish here.
Yep.
A parachute Adams is going to work about anywhere.
Yep.
I don't know what it is about that fly, but it works.
Absolutely.
A zebra midge is going to work just about anywhere that there's a midge. In your fly box, you may have dozens of flies, and they're all kind of in that. I'm talking about for my Western fly box if I'm building one of those. Somebody out there is getting ready to go out west, right? This year is their year.
Yep.
And here you are saying more traditional flies. Maybe I don't have to have something that is an exact hatch. It has to be a size 18 BWO on a cloudy day. And the temperature needs to be between 60 and 72.
You got to stand on 1 foot and all this crazy stuff.
It almost goes back to that golf show. I can't remember that golf movie. Is it Happy Gilmore? I can't remember which one it is. To where the dude's like, put the change in your left pocket versus your right pocket, or however that went. There's a Happy Gilmore fan out there that's just losing their mind right now. But whatever that was that they said, it's not necessarily that way, is it?
No, and so I think what people have to do is set the proper expectation in their mind too. You come out here, you can get into insane, crazy hatches where you do need to have the right fly. Those fish are zoned in on one thing. That's the great part about out here is we got tons of fly shops out here that. If there's a hatch going off, they've got the right fly. But I think the reality of it is in most rivers, 90% of the time, your general attractors are going to fish great. Those times where those hatches are just absolutely insane, magical, and the fish are just picking up one thing, those are far and few between, really.
Let's switch gears just a second here. Let's switch over to where you like to fish.
Okay.
Give me 3 streams that you really, really like out there.
All right.
They don't have to be your favorites because I don't want you to give your favorites and then, have 20 people standing in your hole. Which isn't going to happen, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So 3 favorites for me. Number 1 for me is the Eagle. Eagle's a great place. I think there you have so much variety just in the kind of water you can fish. All within about a 30-minute drive up or down the river. There's areas where you've got these giant boulders and, pocket water. And then you've got areas where it's more pebbly, more wide open, kind of meandering through a meadow stream. Great bug action, great hatches, great fish, good size fish, healthy fish. I think some of the most beautiful wild rainbows I've ever caught have come out of there. You just get these guys that are just rosy red and it's just gorgeous. It's kind of funny, but back when I lived in the Southeast, and I'm still a brown trout guy, don't get me wrong, but, I'd go fish wild streams. You catch rainbows all day, and it was such a gift to catch a brown trout. Out here, you have really great brown trout populations, and I know in some of these streams years back, whirling disease killed off a lot of rainbows, but man, you catch a real nice wild rainbow out here, and it's just like, it'll take your breath away. I think number 2 for me is I really like the Colorado. You've got like 100 miles, literally hundreds of miles of it you can fish. You can fish the upper part where it's the smaller stream up in Rocky Mountain National Park. Fish the lower part below Glenwood Springs where you're talking a wide river that you can't even think about wading across when it's at its lowest point in the winter. Big river.
I haven't been that far down it.
Oh, it's a good spot down there. Great spot to float. Not treacherous to row through or anything. No real big rapids. Great fish. It's a cool spot. And then number 3, and we were talking about the Yampa earlier. Yampa's cool. There's good fish in the Yampa. You got the Stagecoach tailwater, which is a fun tailwater fishery. If you haven't experienced a true Western tailwater, it's a great spot to do it. Cut your teeth in on it. Fish are tough, but there's lots of them. Great bug life there. And then you can work your way down through the freestone parts. You can get some big browns, rainbows. There's pike thrown in there here and there sometimes. I've caught a couple pike out of it. Cool spot. But I think everyone's favorite season out here is summer, and I'm telling you, the most fun to me out here is hiking the high mountain lakes and finding cutthroats. I mean, that's the coolest thing. When you're fishing places that are unthawed 2-3 months out of the year, that's special.
And they're aggressive,
They're aggressive, and there's some spots where they're big too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's some lakes out here, and the key that I found is if you find lakes that have got a good scud population, you'll get big cutthroats. Some of these high mountain lakes have really good scud populations.
Something else you don't hear every day is that little nugget right there.
Yeah, most people go to those lakes thinking they need to be throwing hoppers or whatnot of these things, but you drop a little scud below it, game on.
Good information right there. So I guess my favorite, we'll go to my favorites. So Yampa's number one for me, and I think I told you that earlier. Probably one of the best days I've had fishing. As far as fishing was great, scenery was great, wildlife was off the charts. Lost a huge fish that actually broke the line, broke the tippet. And I'm not talking about 6X either. I'm talking about the real deal. Run off by a thunderstorm and got eat up by mosquitoes.
That's the Western experience.
It is, isn't it? And I had that true Western experience, and I thought it was fantastic. I guess probably my second favorite. Oh, I would say it's a Taylor.
Yeah, Taylor's cool.
Yeah, it's cool because, you see you got 20-inch fish swimming around your feet. So that would be probably one of my next top three. And then the Colorado, you were talking about from high up in the Rocky Mountain National Park. We drove from the Taylor to whichever Platte that was that we fished down there. Then we drove up into the Grand Lake.
Grand Lake, yeah.
Drove in that side. Drove in the Grand Lake side and fished the Colorado there somewhere. Stepped out of the car, threw about 10 casts and caught a brook trout, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Actually, it was real cool. We were inside the park. Messed around, watched a couple moose, got back in the car and drove off. Then a couple years later, went back and fished. I fished it a couple of times from like Twin Bridges to State Bridge or State Bridge to Twin Bridges. I can't remember which one that is. Did that. I like that section. But then we fished Rancho del Rio. Yeah, down to Twin Bridges or Two Bridges, whatever.
Yeah, I can't remember what they are.
That's a pretty long float, but that was a day where we caught them on dries, nymphs, soft hackles,
whatever,
ants. It was just one of those days, and it wasn't like we caught a bunch of fish, but we caught them on everything.
Yeah,
except for probably streamers. I don't think we fished streamers that day. So those are kind of my three.
Yeah.
My big three. I've never done the Eagle, which I would like to do. So I may come back out there, and if you're out there, I'll do the Eagle.
I'd show you around.
So, wow, Garrett, we've been down the road here for, I don't know how long it's been. It's been a little while. It's probably been an hour or more. So we covered your streamer setup right off the bat, your rod setup, ergonomics, presentation, your fly box, your favorite rivers. And I think we got pretty in-depth about most all of that stuff, honestly. I'm sure there's something somebody can learn. There's going to be some things that people think they already know or they do already know, but there's some nuggets in there too, which is really what we dig for on this show. I want to thank everybody for coming in, listening to Southeastern Fly. Again, you can find us at southeasternfly.com. We're a guide service and we're a podcast, and we're really looking to help people learn more about fly fishing and get better. We want every client to be a better angler. That's really kind of what we're about here. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Podcast by Southeastern Fly. It's our Facebook group, and that's where a whole lot of our questions come from. And that's where we kind of get our groove on this, is from the folks that really participate in that. And they ask me questions on the side, and then some of that comes from clients, some of that comes from friends. A lot of those questions coming from a lot of different places. So I think that podcast group is probably our nucleus of anglers that really want to get better, and they really want to drive where this podcast goes. Again, our guest is Garrett Gresham, competition angler, 2013, finished second in the National Fly Fishing Championships in Basalt. Atlanta boy, so that's kind of our connection to Southeastern Fly there. Living in Colorado, living the dream. A lot of folks think they want to live out there, and from what you've been telling me, it's a great place to be. Garrett, I really appreciate you stopping by and being willing to give up good and useful information.
Absolutely. Happy to.
And it's good to see you again, as always. And I keep up with you on Instagram. I think it's Garrett Gresham on Instagram. Yep. Is that right? What is it on that?
I think it's maybe Garrett _ Gresham 1.
Well, like I said, I appreciate you stopping by, and I appreciate everybody listening on Southeastern Fly. See you next time.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, man. we probably need to talk about some of your saltwater stuff at some point. You know it.
That's a whole nother can of worms, man. That's a fun one too. I wish I was an expert, but I know enough to help people catch a couple fish.
Yeah, I need to go down there and visit your dad. He for a long time kept saying, "Why don't you come down?" And then I think he just said, "David's not coming down." But it's tough for me to find time to stop and go. You know, when I'm not going with a family.
Yeah.
How are you this afternoon, this evening? Is it? I guess it's evening there already.
Yeah, not bad, man. It's cold here. It's dumping snow outside my apartment right now.
What?
Yeah, it's crazy.
A friend of mine's grandfather and grandmother used to have hogs close to where we lived, and they went to the bakery and got a whole pickup bed of Twinkies. A whole pickup 4x8.
That's an absurd amount of Twinkies. Diabetes in a truck.
Yeah, so we went up there one evening when they bought it. They bought it during the day. When we got off of school, we went up there, and our job was to open them and just throw them in the pig pen.
Sure.
But because they were all out of date, you know, not by much, but they're out of date. But man, I've never ate so many Twinkies in my life. Oh, they were so good.
Oh man,
I still love them, but man, that day they were.
Yeah.
I was like 12 or 13 years old, so it wasn't quite as big a deal then as it would be now.